Good morning and welcome. It's 9 a.m. India time or 3:30 GMT. First up, news all about the Russian elections. Now, Vladimir Putin has won his fourth term as Russia's president. Exit polls in Russia show that Putin has won the presidency with at least 73% of the votes. Now, Putin made a victory speech in front of his campaign headquarters in Moscow shortly after the exit poll results projected him as the clear leader. He called for national unity and said that he is not planning on making any constitutional reforms just yet. Right, joining me live from Moscow is my colleague Lucy Taylor. Good morning, Lucy. What about the results? What are you hearing about the official results about the elections?
Yes, well, these have been coming in overnight, but it's been obvious since before the election, really, of course, but it's been obvious since the polls closed last night, about 12 hours ago, that this was going to be a landslide victory for Vladimir Putin. We're hearing that he's won about 3/4 of this vote. But as I say, that's not a surprise because this election, his critics would say, was tilted in his favour. There were 8 candidates in total, so 7 challengers to Vladimir Putin. But the main opposition leader in Russia, a man called Alexei Navalny, had been barred from standing ostensibly because of a previous criminal conviction, although he says that conviction was politically motivated or cooked up to prevent him from standing. So we knew that Vladimir Putin was likely to win. The question was by how much, with how significant a majority, and with how much turnout. And on both fronts, it seems like he will be very happy with this result. It seems from the partial results that we've had so far, many of results in by now already, it seems that he's won about 3/4 of the vote with a turnout higher than the last election in 2012. So there have been big celebrations overnight, a concert late at night last night at which Putin himself spoke to the nation, and it was a chance for him to address a lot of the issues that have been building up over the last week, which he himself hasn't actually commented on because he's been busy campaigning. He's left a lot of the diplomatic issues to his foreign ministry. So it was both a night of celebration and also a night when we heard a bit more from Putin himself than we have over the last week or so.
Now, Lucy, you say that Vladimir Putin has reasons to be happy now. He went into the elections hoping to win 70%, hoping for a 70% turnout, of which he will win 70% of the votes. So you think mission accomplished for Putin?
I think so, yes. The turnout does seem to be pretty good for him. Of course, turnout was important in this election because the Kremlin feels it gives the result legitimacy. It affirms Putin's strong base as leader of this country. Although he might have a large majority of the vote, what's important to him is actually how many Russians came out to vote for him. And as I say, projections do seem to be that that was fairly good. On the other hand, the thing that's detracting from this election is the allegations of irregularities or improprieties from both independent observers and opposition monitors. One of the observers, a company called Golos, has said that it had thousands of calls to a hotline that it set up where members of the public could ring in and complain about anything they'd seen at their local polling station or other polling stations which seemed to be against election law. And also on social media, there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of people posting videos which appear to show some people stuffing ballots or in other ways trying to interfere with this election. There are videos of the cameras from the polling stations in some cases where people appear to be putting more than one ballot into the ballot box, which obviously is not allowed, and other cases where people have been blocked from voting or observers have say that they've been blocked from doing their job by crowds of people or by officials in the polling stations. And the second allegation is that people may have been forced or coerced to vote in large groups. So people who have jobs in workplaces may have been told that they have to go to the polling station, not necessarily told who to vote for, but told that they have to vote, and the implication being they should vote for the candidate which their employer approves of. But the response from the Kremlin is that these were very minor allegations which can't be proved. The Central Election Commission, which administers this election, says that it's happy with the transparency of the election. From the preliminary assessments that it's done so far, it feels that any irregularities were very modest.
Now, Lucy, we know that this was the first election in which the Crimean voters got an opportunity to vote for the Russian president. What are you picking up about the turnout there on the Crimean Peninsula?
Well, this is very significant, not just because it's the first election since that happened, but also because it was actually scheduled on the date, on the anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, or in Russia they say the reunification of Crimea. There's a difference in the language used depending which side of that you're on. This happened on the 4th anniversary, and the election was actually moved onto this date, ostensibly because the original date when it was due to be was on the weekend of a public holiday. So the election was moved for procedural reasons, but it just happened to be that it fell on the date of the anniversary of this. So people were watching very closely. It's very much part of Putin's pitch himself about strengthening Russia's base. People here feel very strongly on one side or the other, but he tries to make people feel very strongly patriotic about Crimea. And it does seem like there has been a good turnout there, and very much supporting Putin in that region of the country, of those who did turn out to vote. There was some suggestions of some people not being allowed to vote. The Russian government or the Russian state media has published some allegations of people not being allowed to vote in those areas, but it seems like that was fairly small. And of those people who did turn out, a strong backing for President Putin, as you'd expect.
Lucy, as someone who's been watching Eurasian affairs very closely from your vantage now, we seem to have entered an era of strongmen, be it Xi Jinping in China or Putin in Russia or even Erdogan in Turkey. We know that Xi Jinping has congratulated Putin on his re-election. But come 2024, what's the likely scenario? Would Putin be, would Putin want to change the constitution to allow him to continue indefinitely like Xi Jinping in China? You think he will do a repeat of 2008 when he stepped down to allow someone else to take over the presidency?
Yeah, well, as you say, constitutionally, he wouldn't be allowed to stand for another consecutive term. The Russian constitution only allows for 2 presidential terms at one time. But as you say, we have a pattern for this. Last time it came up, he stood for he served for 2 terms and then stepped into a different position for a term and then stepped back into the presidency. And he's now entering his 4th term. This will make him one of the longest-serving Russian leaders. The only leader who served for longer was Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, and Vladimir Putin is quickly catching him up. He did address this question. He was asked this question yesterday after the result came in. Would you stand in 2024, or indeed would he stand in 2030 when he would legally be allowed to stand again without changing the constitution? And he himself laughed it off. He said, "You're forgetting my age. Am I going to serve until I'm 100? Essentially laughing off and postponing the question to address that later. He won't be 100 in 2030. He'll only be 77, so it's very much possible that he would continue to stand then. Or, as you say, we'll wait and see whether he addresses the question of changing the constitution to allow him to stand again in 2024. We don't know yet if he will do that. It seems he may not do that because he didn't do that 12 years ago. But we wait and see.
Right, and also very quickly, Lucy, looking into the crystal ball, so to speak, looking ahead at his next 6 years of presidency, what do you think his main challenges might be, domestically speaking? Would it be the economy, stagnation, jobs? What's your sense?
Yes, well, it's interesting that you ask about domestic issues because reported internationally, a lot of the focus has been on international security, Russia's position as a superpower, particularly over the last few weeks with the diplomatic rows with the US and with the UK. However, people here in Russia are mostly focused on domestic issues. If you speak to people about who they're voting for, many of them will say they're basing their votes on their own lives, how easy it is to live and work here, how much money they have in their pockets, and also on the wider government here and the corruption issues that people perceive the Russian government has. I would say that Putin's main challenge then is making sure that people remain happy. And the economy over the last few years has been stable. Certainly Putin himself takes credit for stabilizing the economy hugely compared to the collapse that Russia experienced in the 1990s before he came to power. Over the last few years, there's been a bit of stagnation. Oil prices have been low. The economy here has been affected by sanctions from the US and Russia, economic sanctions which make trade a bit more difficult. Recently, in the last few months, oil prices have risen, and that seems to be in Putin's favour because the economy is slightly boosting again. But he will want to make sure that that continues because ultimately his position is safer as long as people here feel stable and wealthy.
And in conclusion, Lucy, now we've touched upon domestic issues that might pose a challenge to Putin going forward. At the global level, how do you think another 6-year term of Putin would mean for countries such as the US and the UK, given the allegations of Putin meddling in the US elections, helping Trump come to power, or even the most recent case of the poisoning of former Russian agent Sergei Skripal in London? So what would another 6-year term of Putin mean for the US, the UK and the world at large?
Well, this language has really reached a crescendo over the last few weeks, hasn't it? With as you say, the poisoning of the former spy, Sergei Skripal, in the UK, which the UK has come out strongly accusing Russia of being behind it because it says the method used to poison Skripal and his daughter was a nerve agent which Russia produces or used to produce. Russia has denied that very strongly, and there's been a really strong battle of words with the UK recently, as well as measures on the diplomatic front, both sides kicking out 23 diplomats from the other side, and Russia, in retaliation to the UK's measures, also ending the operations of the British Council, which is a cultural exchange organisation here. So we'll see whether that will continue or whether that was partly such strong words because of the election and because, as I said, Putin's pitch to Russia is that he is the man who has restored Russia as a superpower. He is a defender of Russia against hostile countries in the West. So it's been actually playing slightly into his favour, his own self-perception, to have this argument bubbling along during the election campaign. Perhaps now that he's secure in another 6-year term, he might moderate that language or try to find some agreement, reconciliation with the UK and with the US, which you also mentioned, a longer running row going on there around election interference and economic sanctions from the US side. But again, he doesn't necessarily have to. He's storing up very strong alliances, as you say, with other strong men around the world who aren't from Western countries. So perhaps he doesn't need to. Perhaps he'll focus on tilting the global perspective more in Russia's favour and other areas such as, you say, China and Turkey.
Right. Lucy Taylor in a very cold Moscow, I'm told -11 as we speak. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Right, moving on. Re-elected Russian President Vladimir Putin talked about former double agent Sergei Skripal's poisoning in Britain. President Putin has rejected the United Kingdom's claims that Moscow was behind the nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal.
Ну и, конечно, думаю, что любой здравомыслящий человек понимает, что это полная чушь, бред, нонсенс, чтобы кто-то в России себе позволил подобные выходки накануне президентских выборов и чемпионата мира по футболу. Ну, просто немыслимо.
President Putin also said that he was open to cooperating with the United Kingdom in the investigation, but the UK had not shown any interest so far.